This podcast can contain content that is sensitive in nature and is intended for emotionally mature audiences. Welcome to Kindness as Prevention, a special October community prevention education and wellness podcast mini-series in honor of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I am your host, Jharman Leitner, scientist, educator, and PhD candidate in developmental psychology. Welcome and thank you for tuning in. This week, we're beginning where it all starts, at home. We'll explore why the way we treat our children and significant others in our homes matters so deeply. Kindness in families isn't just about sweet gestures. It's about safety, respect, and creating an environment where every member can thrive. Domestic violence is one of those topics that is not really desired to be talked about. Often people don't want to hear anything about violence and its impact. They shun away from domestic violence and the fact that it is happening more frequently than it is revealed. Perpetrators don't want to be told that their acts are violent, their thoughts are violent. Victims don't want to be told that they've been impacted significantly by the violence. And silent bystanders don't want to be told to speak up and not remain silent. And this very thought and belief that is carried throughout the culture of this society is what maintains the cycle of violence. Each individual has a decision, has a choice on whether they want to choose kindness over violence. And in spite of this topic not being a popular one, we're going to delve a little bit deeper this month, and we're going to address this issue and its impact, beginning with the home. Have you heard of that phrase, home is where the heart is? It's a phrase that means that home is this place where there is a sense of belonging and an emotional connection because of the people and relationships that have been established there. And though this term is typically used in a way that is positive, because we all are born desiring a sense of belonging and emotional connection. Well, what domestic violence does in the homes is it robs children of the opportunity to grow with a sense of belonging and emotional connection. Anytime a child suffers from or witnesses domestic violence, it makes a shift in the way the brain is designed to develop. There are a number of negative outcomes. The likelihood of experiencing the negative outcomes are very high when domestic violence is on the scene. From having relationship issues in adulthood, academic issues throughout school, incarceration, all of these things are consequences of domestic violence in childhood. The first time I really talked at length with ex-felons was when I had a privilege to work as a consultant with a program called Cure Violence. For those unaware, the Cure Violence program is designed to use former criminals as violence interrupters to mediate conflicts and educate the community to shift norms against violence. My assignment was to conduct clinical assessments on each member of the team with an end goal to develop a strategy for skill building and healthy workplace relationships, because amongst them there was a lot of conflict that existed. There was a lot of disagreements and difficulty being able to work together. During each one of my sessions, the former criminals, every last one of them, revealed that violence was in their childhood. There was one particular client who said his dad would literally make him fight at the age of 2. I mean, he's a toddler, 2 years old. You're barely running around, and I mean, you're just learning so much. You're really barely even here. You're 2 years in, and his dad would make him fight. And if he had lost the fight, his dad would beat him. His dad was also violent against his mother, and he was just a violent person. So this violence interrupter grew up seeing this, experiencing it, and he recalled during his adolescent years just being angry all the time. So that showed up in school, where he got into a lot of fights. It showed up in his neighborhood, where he was involved in a lot of fights and altercations. And he had learned that the default setting was violence. And as soon as he graduated high school, not long after, he got arrested and went to prison. If there had been kindness that led this household, the outcomes for this child would have been significantly different. Now, some of you may be skeptics and say, oh, they could have gotten connected with the wrong people. Well, even when adolescents or even young adults make choices and get connected with wrong people, when the foundation of their childhood is healthy, they revert back to what is healthy, usually. Statistically speaking, over 60% up to 97% of incarcerated individuals have domestic violence in their childhood years. I like to watch Netflix. It's one of the popular streaming platforms right now, and I recently watched a limited series called Adolescence. In the series, a teenage boy was accused of murdering one of his female peers. The teen confessed to this killing, so he was guilty of it. And this didn't come out until the end of the series. So what was interesting to me is throughout the storyline, the father's violent nature surfaced. It was highlighted, as did the son's violent nature. The father was emotionally and psychologically and verbally abusive to his children and his wife. And the son grew up with this and ended up in his teenage years murdering someone. So his violent nature led to actually taking someone's life, which is another potential outcome of having violence in your childhood. In the end of the series, it was a very interesting conversation between the mom and the dad. The dad described his own childhood as involving physical violence. He said his father would beat him and his siblings till they bled, they were bruised. It was just extremely physically painful and emotionally painful. And he said that he had vowed that he would never treat his children like that. He thought that just because the way his violence manifested, it wasn't that bad. Because his violence did not look like what his father did to him, he didn't think that what he was doing was that detrimental. He compared what he was doing to the unhealthy behaviors of someone else, which is not how you determine whether your thoughts, your actions, or your attitudes, whether they're healthy or not. We have to compare that to what psychological science and mental health says. There are standards, not just in mental health, across everything. When you go to the medical doctor, there's a standard on whether you have high blood pressure or good blood pressure, or whether your blood glucose levels are satisfactory. If they're too high or too low, it could be a sign or indication of diabetes or something else. I'm not a medical professional, but I do go to the doctor regularly, and I know that these things are measured. And they're measured in order to notify people of whether your status of health is good or whether it's poor. It's the same with psychological health and wellness. We have to go to professionals to determine whether our thoughts, our attitude, our behaviors are within a healthy realm. Emotional and psychological abuse, believe it or not, according to studies, that 8 out of 10 individuals are perpetrators of this particular abuse. And the reason for that is because it is one of the most subtle and hidden abuses out here. It is so subtle that you could miss it. I mean, you could feel that something is happening, but you could totally miss that it's happening at the same time. Globally, it's estimated that 3 out of 5 children are victims of this type of violence. 3 out of 5 children are victims of psychological violence and emotional abuse at the hand of their parents and caregivers. That's why the home is so important. And when home is where the heart is, when the home is filling up that heart with violence, it becomes toxic. Places that don't have a sense of belonging, places that don't have a sense of connection, becomes the norm. It affects a child's well-being all around. Well, how does it affect a child's well-being? That's a great question. It interferes with healthy brain development, whether it's suffered or witnessed. Another way I can describe it is that it warps or deforms the mind. It even forms it in a way to reject what is healthy, to reject the truth about its toxic state. It's similar to what happens to the brain and mind to a newborn who's exposed to drugs and alcohol prenatally. Yes, that means that violence is an addiction. There's a high with every hit, literally, if someone is physically abusive. But for emotional and psychological abuse, that high comes with every hit of anger, every hit of control, every hit of power, every hit of dominance, every hit of being threatening, intimidating, and frightening. And if anyone understands addiction, the more you take a hit, the more you want to continue taking a hit, then the harder it becomes to stop. Violence actually causes brain damage. That's what I would say. I would say it's brain damage, similar to like a concussion for an athlete. Every time you're exposed to violence or suffer from it, it's like your brain and your mind take a hit. And what ends up happening is that deficits begin to show up in every area of development, similar to concussions, cognitive issues, the ability to remember and process information, even physical issues from it. And another area is the social emotional area. That is the area that is responsible for relationship health. Child abuse or exposure to domestic violence shatters or fails to establish 2 key components of social emotional development. Number 1, the foundations of self-concept. That's a child's self-worth, their identity, their ability to emotionally regulate. The second one is social functioning, and that has everything to do with their interactions and engagements with other people. That's the part that helps us to operate in a healthy way in relationships. That includes the ability to trust, to have an attachment that is healthy, to be able to show empathy, and to resolve conflict in a healthy way. Domestic violence robs a child of that, and it often results in behavioral, social, and academic challenges throughout childhood and adolescence. And without intervention early on, whether it's in early childhood or the adolescent years, these distortions almost always continue into adulthood, often manifesting as low self-esteem, difficulty with intimacy, increased risk of mental health struggles, and perpetuation of unhealthy relational patterns. So the cycle never stops, because those who continue to perpetuate just create more victims who will then become victims who perpetuate. Can you see the cycle? Can you see that it just continues like a hamster wheel? Somebody has to jump off if we want the cycle to stop. And today, we can think about a new informed decision that can be made, and that is choosing kindness as a lifestyle in order to prevent domestic violence and reduce it, which domestic violence in itself is correlated with mental health issues. So it will actually help reduce that as well. If you would just take a moment to consider the impact that violence has had in your life if you've been exposed to it as a child. How is it impacting your parenting? Statistically, almost all perpetrators of violence do not seek help and support to reduce their violent acts, even when it's mandated, even if it's a violent act that someone ended up getting arrested and going to jail, and they're in the court system and they've been made to go to an intervention program. The statistics show that the violence is still highly likely to be repeated. That's because there hasn't been a shift in thoughts about violence. To stop the cycle, we must begin and continue treating each new life with kindness. To reduce the negative impact, perpetrators must shift their normalcy of violence to a normalcy of kindness. Kindness has so many benefits. It promotes improved wellness through mood and increased feelings of satisfaction. When we commit to choosing kindness, this is what we'll experience. Kindness for children, it protects them, it preserves them, it provides safety for them. A lifestyle of kindness does matter because it helps to prevent childhood trauma under the hand of domestic violence. I want to encourage you today that there is hope in reducing domestic violence against our children. I challenge you to be a violence interrupter. I challenge you to be parents who will be intentional in learning what constitutes healthy child development and dedicate your years of child rearing to providing the basic need of physical and emotional safety for them to grow in a healthy way. Through a positive shift to kindness-mindedness, we can prioritize kindness as a lifestyle. It begins in our thoughts. And this is one simple act that we can focus on. Sometimes there's so many things that we are told or we feel like we have to stop or we have to start. If we would just zone in to kindness as a priority in our day-to-day, violence will begin to fade to the background. I'm going to share a final personal anecdote, and I'm hoping just to move someone to action. I recently started prioritizing my physical well being more. Um, I did go through a separation a couple years ago, and I left an emotionally and psychologically abusive marriage. And it was very difficult during that time to focus on my physical well being because I was in such a, what I would describe as a mental fog. And I will delve more into that in episode 3, kindness in romantic relationships and friendships. But it really wasn't until maybe a year after the separation where I feel like I was coming out of some of that fogginess. And that's when I was able to start really prioritizing that. I was able to look into really my dietary preferences and what my body needed in order to make the necessary shifts. Now, I will say that my health was not poor, but I wanted it to be better and I wanted it to be sustainable. So I began to look at what I was eating, how much of it I was eating, when I was eating it. I did research on certain foods, combinations, and snacks that met the needs of my palate, my preferred flavors, textures, all of that in order to begin substituting some of those unhealthy snacks. Now, kettle cooked chips is one of them, and I really love kettle cooked chip. I mean, the crunch just is satisfying for me. And I would eat those later at night. And so I had to implement some self control. Don't grab the chips later. And then I just started fading out eating chips altogether and subbing it for other healthy, crunchy foods. As I began to do that, in combination with calorie counting, just making sure using those calories as a guide, it's there for a reason. We can't just go over the calorie count because we want to eat and think that we're going to remain healthy. No, it's a guide to stay within a certain frame if you want to remain at a healthy weight. So I began to do that. I began to exercise more. I discovered that Pilates was my happy space. And so I started doing reformer Pilates every week and combining all of those changes first in my thoughts and what I began to prioritize about my physical well-being, including exercise and diet. I began to see the transformation in my daily diet lifestyle. My desire for the chips began to fade, and my strength to resist it when I wanted to default back to the old ways and habits of eating the chips late at night, the strength to resist that, it totally increased. Those of us who have gone on a weight loss journey and been able to sustain it, you understand. Well, it's the same principle when it comes to transformation from a violent nature if we would just prioritize kindness. We cannot see a positive change in the data by doing this individually. Everyone, this has to be done collectively. We all remember the COVID-19 era. How could we forget that? It was devastating during that time. During the time, the disease was wreaking havoc in our lives, and there were hesitations and mistrust in BIPOC communities around this vaccine. Well, scientists had discovered that there was one group of individuals who absolutely needed to take the vaccine due to being at high risk. Do you remember who those people were? It was the immunocompromised. If you have experienced violence or any type of abuse and trauma in your childhood, you are like the immunocompromised with the COVID-19 virus. You are a group of people with the highest risk of unfavorable outcomes, and treatment is critical for health and wellness. Yeah, that part. That's the part that no one wants to hear. It is critical to seek out treatment If you have been exposed to violence in your childhood, that is not something you just get over. There was also another group, though, during COVID who was at highest risk, but not for being immunocompromised, but for being Black. I had the honor of working as the research director with the Anchor Group, which is a Seattle-based communications, public relations, and marketing firm, in partnership with the Washington Department of Health and a communications company called C+C. We were to collaboratively develop a campaign that will reach the Black community and move them to act on getting vaccinated because the community's vaccination rates were the lowest and deaths were the highest. Some of you remember. You remember the reports in the news. One of the participants during our campaign interviews said that for Black people, getting the vaccine was necessary if we wanted to stay alive, because it was about staying out of the hospital. Because the moment we entered, that's when our chances of survival decreased due to systemic violence. Our collaborative team won a public relations award behind this campaign because there were positive outcomes from the campaign. Yes, we saw an increase in vaccinations. People began to get it and understand. If a community can hear the importance and value in getting the COVID vaccine, I know we can hear the importance and value in seeking psychological support services, particularly if you have experienced violence in your childhood. Psychological support services are great regardless of any moment in mental health, any shift or changes or losses or disappointments, but specifically if you have experienced it in your childhood, it is necessary. The effects of it impact the way you parent, and there are things you are not going to typically see because the way violence has formed your brain. That's why it's called the formative years. FORM is at the beginning of formative, because what is happening to you in your home environment as a child, it is forming your perceptions and your beliefs, and it is taking away and deforming that healthy part. It is warping it, and it is unfortunate. But the only way we can stop this misfortune is to prioritize kindness. You could be the very one wreaking havoc in your child's life, just like COVID-19 did to many of our lives. Be kind to yourself and allow the services to be the treatment or the vaccine you need to protect and preserve your child's well-being and your well-being. It's going to help you and the people you're connected to. And it's going to help you stay kindness-minded. Focus on being kind. We can do this. Live it out daily. Stay committed and consistent, and you will begin to see transformation. This podcast is sponsored by Be Well Consulting, a psychological health and wellness consulting firm dedicated to changing the emotional climate of relationships and improving relationship health across environments. Whether it is in the home, on the job, or in the community, Be Well is here to support your needs in improving relationship health for individuals, couples, families, and businesses. Connect with us on Instagram at Consult Be Well, or access our website link in the description. If you are experiencing any type of distress, are in a violent relationship, or believe you are a perpetrator of violence, you can call or text 988. 988 is not just for suicide and severe crisis. 988 is available for any moments in mental health you experience. If you are a victim of domestic violence, support groups can be very beneficial for your healing. Living Waters of Hope has an online domestic violence support group called Oasis. If you are a perpetrator of violence, seek professional support services. Depending on the area you reside in, there may not be many local support groups for perpetrators, but there are some online. And whether you have experienced violence as a victim, perpetrator, or never experienced it, I encourage everyone to learn what is healthy versus unhealthy in mental and psychological health from professionals in the field. This will provide you with a better understanding of what you personally need to establish and maintain psychological health. Thank you for joining me today on Kindness as Prevention. I am your host, Jharman Leitner. Remember, kindness at home can prevent harm and build foundations of trust and safety. If this episode spoke to you, share it with someone you love and keep practicing kindness in the daily rhythms of family life. Together, we can nurture homes that are emotionally safe, whole, and free from a lifestyle of violence. Tune in next week as we talk about kindness in schools. It's a place where violence happens. It's not categorized as domestic violence, but it impacts our children in an unhealthy way. Until next time, keep kindness on your mind.